Hello. If you could please take your seats, the program is about to begin. We'd appreciate that very much. My name is Rachel Moran, and I'm the Dean here at UCLA School of Law, and I wanted to welcome everyone to the keynote address of the 2015 UCLA Law Review Symposium. On behalf of UCLA School of Law, I would like to thank you for joining us for a discussion about a topic that I believe is extremely important: human trafficking and exploitation. We have convened some of the most noted legal scholars, practitioners, and leaders among trafficking and exploitation survivors for this two-day symposium to help raise awareness of the issues associated with this pressing global challenge. Today's conversation is taking place in the right location. California is one of the nation's primary destinations in a worldwide trafficking network, and problems of exploitation and victimization are persistent in communities throughout Los Angeles. We also have gathered the right people for this discussion, most notably our keynote speaker, California Attorney General Kamala Harris, who has a demonstrated history of committed work against trafficking in California. We are extremely honored to welcome Attorney General Harris to UCLA Law for what I know will be an enlightened discussion of these critical issues. UCLA Vice Chancellor Carol Goldberg will now say a few words about Attorney General Harris and her work, but thank you again for your participation in this important conversation.
Thank you very much, Dean Moran. And in addition to being Vice Chancellor here at UCLA, I am a professor at the School of Law and very pleased to see you all here at this conference. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, California Attorney General Kamala Harris. I first encountered her courageous energy and eloquence in the spring of 2009 when she was the keynote speaker at another important UCLA event, the kind of event that all of the law students here fervently anticipate, and that is the UCLA School of Law Commencement. By the way, if you want to hear her inspiring words, they are available on YouTube. She was then, at that time, district attorney of a city to the north, an office she first won in 2003 and to which she was overwhelmingly reelected in 2007. I mean San Francisco, of course. But her reputation had already spread to the south because of her willingness to buck the tough-on-crime orthodoxies of California politics, orthodoxies that had led us to 3 strikes and other draconian measures, measures that were not actually working to combat high rates of recidivism. Her 2009 book, Smart on Crime, A Career Prosecutor's Plan to Make Us Safer, draws upon research as well as her years of experience with the criminal justice system as a prosecutor to show how we can turn nonviolent offenders into law-abiding citizens. And unlike many of us who theorize here in the university, she was actually able to put her ideas into practice. As district attorney in San Francisco, she instituted a Back on Track program that included partnerships with major employers to assist nonviolent offenders to rebuild productive lives. The results were positive and compelling. Now that's a smart way to combat crime. Since becoming Attorney General as Chief Lawyer for the people of California, she has championed a broad array of causes, including consumer protection, marriage equality, defense of the Affordable Care Act, and strengthening privacy protections and online safety. Just one example of her bold initiatives has been her response to the mortgage foreclosure crisis, which has included creation of multi-divisional mortgage fraud strike force, development of a California Homeowners Bill of Rights that the legislature passed with her strong support and the governor signed, and on behalf of California homeowners, she secured more than $18 billion from the nation's banks as part of the national mortgage settlement, including $12 billion in principal reductions. Thank you, Attorney General. We needed that. Yes. However, as her record demonstrates, no cause has occupied Attorney General Harris more intensely than the cause this conference spotlights, the scourge of human trafficking and exploitation. Because of who she is and the position she holds, she has the capacity to bring unprecedented attention and resources to combating this activity, and she has done that. She has not only walked the walk, she has been one of the leaders of the march. In 2012, her office released a report on the state of human trafficking in California, describing the growth in the activity, the involvement of transnational gangs, and the new technologies that traffickers use. 2 years later, her office released another report focusing on transnational criminal organization, which focused on a number of trafficking activities, including human trafficking. The theme of Smart on Crime, the title of her 2009 book, has continued to inform Attorney General Harris's work as her team has harnessed many of the same technologies and social media used by traffickers to prevent and disrupt their activities. She has also employed the internet, social media, and mobile devices for outreach to survivors and to raise public awareness about this atrocious crime. Our keynote speaker is a pioneer both in her initiatives and in her person. She holds many firsts: first female, first African American, first Asian American of our great state. With tremendous admiration for her extraordinary dedication and brilliant efforts on behalf of all of us, I give you Attorney General Kamala Harris.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Goldberg, for that incredible introduction and for all of your work. And I also want to thank Dean Moran for your leadership of the next group of folks who one of you, hopefully all of you, will at some point become Attorney General of California. I'm honored to be here, and it's wonderful to see so many students and faculty paying attention to this, one of our most challenging and important issues. By way of background, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself because I think many of us share a story that is very similar. I am one of two daughters of parents who met when they were graduate students at the University of California, Berkeley, in the 1960s. And they met when they were active in the civil rights movement. So my sister Maya and I, we joke that we grew up surrounded by a bunch of adults who spent full time marching and shouting about this thing called justice. And in many ways, it was growing up in that environment that informed what I would choose to do with my career, because, of course, the architects of the civil rights movement were the lawyers. It was Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston and Constance Baker Motley, who understood the incredible skill of this profession of law and its ability to translate the passion from the streets to the courtrooms of our country, and to do the work that unfortunately often needs to be done of reminding folks of the great promise we articulated in 1776. We are all and should be treated as equals. So I decided at a very young age I wanted to become a lawyer, and right out of law school at UC Hastings, my family gathered around. I'm sure students, you're going to have or have had that experience, and my family gathered around, okay, Kamala, so what are you going to do in your fight for justice? And I was very pleased and excited to share with them that I had decided to become a prosecutor. Well, you're laughing because you have some sense of who my family is. And so you can imagine that I had to, they were curious about this decision, and in some ways I had to defend it like one would a thesis. But what I said then, and what I maintain today, after a career as a prosecutor, and I am now the top cop of the biggest state in this country, law enforcement has such a profound and direct impact on the most vulnerable among us, and has as a responsibility, as a job, to do the work of being a voice for the voiceless and the vulnerable, and do the work of, in a process of creating safety, also provide for dignity. So that's the work I decided I wanted to do. And understanding that it's a false choice to suggest if one cares about and wants to fight for civil rights, that it is opposite of being a part of law enforcement and doing the work that needs to be done to keep communities safe. Because after all, both are about being a voice for the most voiceless and vulnerable. So I started my career at the Alameda County DA's office. It's a great office, years before Earl Warren had actually been the head of that office. And I, as a line prosecutor, personally prosecuted everything from low-level offenses to homicides. And I would stand before juries and talk with them about why justice requires that there will be swift and severe and certain consequence and accountability when one human being kills another human being, when a woman is raped, when a child is molested. And that is the work that I did for the bulk of my career, and it is the work I do today as your Attorney General. So when I think about the issue of human trafficking, I think about it in the context of all of those experiences. And I'd like to share with you a couple of points in particular that have been informed by specific experiences I've had in my career and in life. But the first point must be to really congratulate and thank you for the incredible and comprehensive coverage that we have provided and UCLA has provided over the last 2 days on this topic. I think one of the points that it makes very clear is human trafficking is not a monolith. There are many components. There are many components in terms of the pathology that is at play, in terms of what we must do in terms of prevention and reaction, how we must think of the issue, the populations that are impacted and involved, the diversity with which they exist and live, and what we must do to understand that if we are going to deal with it as a whole, we're going to have to approach it from its discrete parts. So 2 things in particular I'll share with you as an experience that I've had that inform my perspective. One is back when I was a line prosecutor in Alameda County, I was assigned a case involving the gang rape of a girl who lived in a group home. And I will tell you, this experience was the most frustrating. Why? Well, my investigator was absolutely just in a tizzy about our victim because she wouldn't come to court. She wouldn't show up when it was time to talk. She had a bad attitude. Oh, she was awful, everyone said. But let me tell you about who she is and who she was at that moment in time. She was a child who was in the dependency system. Why is someone in the dependency system? Because they have been exposed to and a victim of abuse or neglect. She was living and had been accelerated or decelerated from a foster care home to a group home. And she was living then at that group home and living in a community. She didn't want to be there. So she'd walk around and leave the group home, and she was so vulnerable to anyone that would give her attention. So there were a group of guys who lived on the corner who would say, oh, we'll look out for you. I hate the group home, she says. I want to run away. We'll take care of you if you want to run away. And what happened is she was raped by several of them. So I got the case, and it came time to prosecute the case. And when we finally got her to trust just a couple of us, me, the prosecutor, the investigator, she said, okay, I will testify. She hit that witness stand, and she had the baddest attitude you have ever seen. She had full-on makeup. She was wearing whatever clothes she thought made her look cute. Her arms were crossed. She was chewing gum. She wouldn't look anybody in their eye. It got to the point that in my closing argument to the jury, I looked at them and I said, I know you don't like her. I know you would not want your children to associate with her. I know you think she's got a bad attitude and could care less about you or this process. And I will tell you, that's exactly what those predators counted on. The jury convicted. We went to go look for her, to tell her they believed you, because of course part of her disposition on the stand was she didn't think anybody would believe her, so she didn't want to expose herself to being sincere about her experience. So we went to look for her, and she had, again, run away. And my investigator and I then went, this case was out of Oakland. Where has she gone, where has she gone? We asked around. The word on the street was she was in San Francisco. We went looking for her and learned that she was being prostituted on the streets of San Francisco. She never knew that that jury believed her. And when we started looking for her, one of the things that I realized is where could she go? And then, when we started to think more about it, realized that she would be called in the system and categorized as a teenage prostitute. What does that mean? That reads mini criminal. If she was brought into the system, it was most likely she would have been brought in because a vice police officer, a vice cop, would have picked her up on the street for prostitution. She would have been brought where? To juvenile hall. What would the judge do with her? Send her home? No, that was not a good place for her. Send her back on the streets and let her be on her own and take care of herself? No, she's a minor. The only place for her to go is juvenile hall, where she would be in a context and in a situation that everything that would talk to her would tell her she committed a crime, when in fact she had faced some of the worst victimization in her entire life that one can imagine a child can experience. And so back then, years ago, having prosecuted that case, I got to know a woman who many of you may know, and I hope you do know her, and may she rest in peace, and her name is Norma Hotaling, who started an organization called SAGE. And I started to get educated on what this meant. And SAGE, I think there's been some conversation during the conference about it, standing against global exploitation. And I started to learn more about the pathologies and the experiences that these girls and women were having, predominantly girls and women, but certainly boys and men also. And started to learn about what we needed to do and the holes that exist in our system that don't allow us to adequately approach and deal with this. And so that's one experience that has informed my perspective on this issue. Another experience, fast forward to, I was elected Attorney General and started in 2010, or 11, January 2011. And the first trip I decided to take, official trip after taking office, was to go down to Imperial County, to a town in Imperial County, California, called Calexico, California. Calexico is right on the border with Mexico. In fact, the Mexican side of the border, on the mirror image side of Calexico, is a place called Mexicali, so it's an interesting play on words. And I went down there because being a courtroom prosecutor, I wanted to go to the scene of the crime. I wanted to see the tunnels. So I got a tour of the tunnels connecting Calexico, California to Mexicali, Mexico. And I saw actual tunnels and I saw photographs of tunnels. I saw photographs of some tunnels with walls as smooth as the walls in your living room, lined with lighting and air conditioning, which made a very obvious point clear. Those tunnels were about some people making a whole lot of money in the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And these big burly guards down there who I was talking with described to me with tears in their eyes about children as young as 5 being trafficked through those tunnels. So these two experiences lead me then to have this discussion with you. From a perspective that is about what can we do, being the proud state of California, to bring everything that we naturally do to a challenge in a way that we can improve the situation and provide leadership for the country. I think about that in the context of the first meeting I attended of the National Association of Attorneys General, NAG. 'Cause nobody thought that through clearly. And I walked into that room, being the top cop of the big estate, and it was so clear to me that everyone still very much believes in that old adage, as goes California, goes the nation. They still look to us and at us as what change looks like. They look at us knowing that we exercise and conduct ourselves unburdened by what has been and instead motivated by what can be. And so on this issue in particular then, let's think about how California has a unique and important role to play. Well, first of all, let's look at the fact that California probably has the largest population of individuals who are being trafficked, both because we happen to be a state with 38 million people. We happen to be a state that is the 8th largest economy in the world. Meaning what? Well, one of my jobs is to concern myself with protecting consumers. You heard the Vice Chancellor talk about that in connection with the work we did around the foreclosure crisis. Well, the consumers of California consume both legal goods and services and illegal goods and services. So we consume a lot of things. We are an attractive target for anyone selling their wares. We also happen to be a border state in terms of Mexico, and we have some of the largest ports in the world. So there are many entry points and many reasons that California becomes attractive for predators and people who want to profit, in this case, off of the selling of another human being. We can look at it in terms of some of the work that we did that has been mentioned in terms of the study that my office conducted in 2011, which we published in 2012, about the state of human trafficking in California. And we know that from that work that 72% of the victims of human trafficking in California are born right here in the United States. They're that child I was talking about earlier. They're that runaway from Kansas who gets trafficked to Vegas, who ends up in Los Angeles. We can look at the fact that in California, 94% of the victims of human trafficking, based on our study, are female. And we know from that work the average age is 12 to 14 years old. So we have challenges in terms of who the population is. When we look at it in terms of this issue, then, of being smart on crime. The Vice Chancellor talked about that. I believe that when we look at criminal justice policy, we have to dispel certain false choices. And one is the false choice that suggests on criminal justice policy, we're either smart on crime, we're either soft on crime or tough on crime, instead of asking, are we smart on crime? And if we're going to ask and think about whether we're smart on crime, I would suggest one of the most important methods and tools that we have is the public health model and everything it tells us. What does the public health model say? If you've got an epidemic, health epidemic, or let's just substitute crime for health, what is the best way to deal with it? Prevention first. There's no question. If the sniffles take on, then early intervention. But if we're dealing with it in the emergency room or the prison system, it's far too late, ineffective, and too expensive. So let us conduct ourselves then with what has been a proven model for dealing with any big issue or epidemic, prevention. So on the issue of human trafficking then, I would suggest in California, part of what we have to dedicate significant resources to addressing is the failure of our foster care system. The foster care system in California is not working, and it is certainly not working for the children we're talking about. The work that we did tells us that sexually abused minors are 28 more times likely to be arrested for prostitution than those that were not abused. And by the way, when we're talking about abuse in this context, we're talking about abuse that occurs in a situation where the abuser is someone in a relationship of trust with that child. Let's look at it from the perspective of two of our largest counties, Los Angeles and Alameda. In LA County, 59% of 174 children arrested for prostitution were in the foster care system. In Alameda County, 41% of human trafficking victims were foster care children. If we want to prevent this issue from occurring, if we want to address it by the smartest way we can, which is prevention, we've got to critically examine what we're doing in our foster care system. And I would suggest, in particular, looking at what's happening in our group homes. But we have to look at it from the context of realizing that these children who are in this system are not there because they want to be there. And we have, in many ways, made them invisible. And we have not put the resources into them. And we are being foolish in that regard because failure to do so ensures that we are going to pay the price later. I have never walked in a living room in all the campaigns I've been involved with for myself or anyone else, and on the top 5 list of concerns that people have is children in the foster care system. They do care about crime. They care about their personal safety. They care about wasted dollars in our government systems. Well, let's care about foster care children. Because where they end up is not only as victims, but as perpetrators of crime. They end up being very, very substantial consumers of our public health system, our welfare system, our social services system. They end up not becoming productive in terms of contribution to our basic line in terms of tax base. And in a world that we prioritize, the fact that we are now global as an economy and we need a substantial workforce and develop that workforce, let's recognize this is one of the issues that is connected to all of that. And if we focus on it, we can actually fix it. So I know there's been discussion about the foster care system here, but given the experience I have looking at this issue statewide, looking at it as the top cop, and looking at it as the top lawyer of the state, I would suggest that of the discrete parts that are contributing to our concern about human trafficking, our foster care system is a very big one. And with that in mind, actually 3 weeks ago now, I announced something we've been working on in your Department of Justice for the last 3 years, which is we are about to unveil and roll out a new division of the California Department of Justice, which I have named the Bureau of Children's Justice. Thank you. And in particular, we are working on children's issues from a perspective that we traditionally do with other cases. We concern ourselves with consumers, for example. The consumers of California are a priority for the California Department of Justice. Somebody's selling you products and making false representations, we're on it. Somebody, selling bad products, we're on it. Somebody shipping stuff in here, we're on it. False and fraud in mortgages, we're on it. Well, I say it's time we think of children as consumers. They may not write checks. They may not be in the store negotiating the contract, but they are absolutely consumers of goods and services. So let's look at them as consumers and think of them then in terms of all the rights a consumer should have, in terms of the quality of the product, in terms of the representations that are made about the product, and in terms of performance. So that's part of what we will be doing in terms of our perspective and approach with this new Bureau of the California Department of Justice. We're also looking at the issue of transnational organized crime. As I said earlier, that trip to Calexico was eye-opening like never before. So part of what we did as your Department of Justice, as California, we reached out to attorneys general from around the country, mostly those that are border states, and we invited them to join us, and they did, in what we have created, a consortium of attorneys general to focus on the issue of transnational criminal organizations with an emphasis on human trafficking. And we actually then, I took a group of them down to Mexico City last year to meet with the attorneys general of the various states of Mexico and the attorney general of the country of Mexico to address this issue, again with a particular emphasis on human trafficking. Why? Transnational criminal organizations, I think most people say that's a very big issue. That's a very big area of concern. They're dangerous, they're awful. Let's deal with them. There are all kinds of fabulous movies and television shows about it. Well, here's what I know, again, as a prosecutor. Transnational criminal organizations or local gangs, their motivation is to make money. That's their motivation. But what becomes scary about it is they will break the law to do it, and they will do whatever they need to do, including engaging in very dangerous and lethal activity. So, trafficking of guns and drugs. Well, if somebody walked in here with an assault weapon, we'd all recognize it. If somebody walked in here with a bowl of, cocaine, most of us would recognize it. Human trafficking is not so detectable. And so what they have learned is, like any business person would do, what's the return on my investment, ROI, right? Because also, let's be very clear, just because somebody's a criminal doesn't make them stupid. Let's be clear. So what they have figured out is that unlike trafficking in guns and drugs, trafficking human beings is low risk, high reward. What they have figured out, when I sell the drugs to somebody, they use it and it's gone. With this commodity, I can sell it over and over again. We have heard stories, and there is a lot of anecdotal and real evidence of the fact that local gangs who traditionally have been incredibly territorial, lethally so, on this issue, they're getting on quite well. When she's used up in this jurisdiction, let's trade her over to the other one. There are countless stories of branding these girls with tattoos. This is a very, very real issue. And so part of what we have been doing, and with the help from a lot of the folks who are here, is trying to reorient law enforcement in the way that we think about putting our tools into addressing crime and talking about how we can get what we really want to go after. And I think of it kind of in the perspective of, remember years ago, so many of you are so young, but remember how we got Al Capone? Got him on taxes, right? I mean, you got to believe everything that, has been written and shown about that. They were killing people left, right, and center. Got them on taxes. So on this, let's realize that actually, if we reorient the way we are thinking about how we need to go after transnational criminal organizations or lethal street gangs, this might be the smartest way to do it. But what do we have to do in order to then achieve that goal? Well, the first thing is we cannot treat our witness like a criminal, right? So, and so this is, by the way, this is aside from everything else we're talking about, which is all of her life experience and why she should not be treated like a criminal. But put that aside. If you want to go after the lethal gang and only focused on that, there's a really good reason not to treat her like a criminal. Because we want her to cooperate so we can go after the real bad guy. So for all of those reasons, let's think about how we bring her in, both because we don't want to treat her that way, because it is inappropriate and it is inaccurate as a perspective, but also because she can help us go after something that is much more dangerous. And so as a specific point, we actually recommend in the work that we did with our report on human trafficking, as well as the report that we have published on transnational criminal organizations, and all of them are available online, and I think we have hard copies here. I would suggest, and we've been doing this training with law enforcement, and we have incredible law enforcement leaders who are right on top of this. But let's think about not bringing those cases in through the vice division. Let's think about where else in the department we would want to bring those cases in a way that we can have her sit down and talk with us about her experience in a way we can get her help, and in a way she can help us go after the predator. And so as a specific point, part of what we're working on together, all of us, is the training that is necessary to support the natural desire local law enforcement has to go after the real bad guy. And doing it in a way that also recognizes, and again, I'm going to get into, I could go on and on with all the kinds of detail, but I'll just add one more bit of detail. Part of what we also have to do is realize that most police departments are not LAPD. They're very small. I think we have something like 400 police departments in California. So most of them cannot set up a human trafficking division. As an aside, and again, we have to inform public policy in a way that is connected with reality. And so recognize that in a lot of the small police departments, they've been laying people off in the last several years because of the budget crisis. They're downsizing. They don't have a lot of extra bandwidth. So part of what we should be thinking about in terms of the public policy is let's encourage and come up with the models that exist for those smaller departments creating task forces where they roundtable. So, because most police departments will naturally have a narcotics division, probably have a gang division and a vice division, and maybe a homicide division. Well, this kind of case, human trafficking, is going to touch on all of those areas. So let's bring them together to create a task force and basically roundtable within the department the cases. So we can start to see the patterns and again, go after the real bad guys. So those are two of the areas that I think about. And then there is another, which is, again, back to where we are and the beauty of who we are as a state. We are creating in our backyard the technology that is changing the way the world works. All of us who are concerned with public policy, I believe, have to, consistent with everything we want to achieve, have a real sense of dedication for the need of adoption of technology by government. Because government, I'm going to tell you, I am a devout public servant, but we're behind the ball. We're behind the ball. When I was DA of San Francisco in 2004, 2/3 of my lawyers didn't have email. The San Francisco Police Department, under the current chief, just rolled out email in 2011. That's a reality. Shocking, but true. Look, I just exposed, okay? So if we're going to ground public policy in reality so that we can truly be effective, right? Let's deal with what's going on the ground. And in particular, the need for adoption of technology by government in general, law enforcement in particular. I'm proud of some of the work my office has been doing, bringing technology to law enforcement. In fact, your Department of Justice created a mobile app for cops on the street. More about that next lecture. But I'll say this, why is that important on this issue? Well, when I was doing this work in the early years, quite some time ago, one of the public education outreach campaigns that we did to victims, and many of you were probably involved in these same type of things, is we had a poster campaign, remember? And we would design a poster that would have the 800 number and the contact this, and we'd put them in bathroom stalls, right? So that the young women in the privacy where she might the only place she may ever exist where she is by herself, would be in that stall, and then she could get the information and write it down, put it somewhere, and hopefully use it when she was ready to use it. Well, now, everybody, most people, are carrying a smartphone in their back pocket. So let's figure out a way to work with, as we have been doing, but on a broader basis, with the folks in technology, to get their best minds to help us figure out creative ways we will communicate with victims. For example, back when I was doing this, again, Norma Hotaling, she pointed out to me in the early days that I was becoming aware of this, she said, Kamala, So especially as it relates to women and girls being trafficked from other countries. She said, so just imagine you're 14 years old, grew up in California, I did, and somebody says to your mother, there's a better life she can have in China. She can work there for a couple of years, be a English tutor to a child, make some money, send it back, and we'll bring her back. And so the mom says, okay, I want a better life for my child. Put her on the boat to China. And then the child ends up in some remote village where no one speaks English. They don't know the culture, they don't know the streets, they don't know anything about where they are. How are they possibly going to reach out for help? They don't know the coins or what coins would be used if you would go to a public telephone. This is how Norma would talk to me about it, to really emphasize the point about the isolation of, in particular, victims who are trafficked across international boundaries. The isolation. I mean, they don't even have the coins or would know how to talk to the operator, right? Wow. That really made the point. Well, now, to just use that as an example of the isolation of victims, whether they're trafficked intrastate or internationally, technology is available to almost everyone. So let's figure out how we are going to work with, as we have been doing, our technology companies to access victims when they're in that private moment where they can have information that can be helpful to them. For example, one example. A few years ago, we partnered with Yahoo, and we asked them, would they work with us on coming up with, and which we did, keywords that would be associated with trafficking. And if those words were put in the search engine, then a banner would drop, giving that individual information about help and what's available to them. Well, let's build on that. That was a few years ago, and all you bright students here and all of the people here who do research, let's come up with creative ways we can work with our technology companies to deal with that. And in that way, recognize this issue of human trafficking is evolving in many ways, but so are the tools that are available to us to actually combat it. So I'm going to close because I would like to take some questions, but I'm going to close by saying this. We are definitely facing a lot of challenges. And part of what is insidious about human trafficking is that people don't see what they're seeing. And so what we're doing with this conference is helping people to see what they're seeing, to identify what's happening and understand it. And when I look around this room at all of the people who are here, who are doing this work, and what it will mean exponentially in terms of the public education and information, I am very hopeful and optimistic that we can really take this issue on in a way that will be smart on crime and will be smart in terms of being a voice for some of the most vulnerable and voiceless people we know. And I just want to thank everyone here because you may know it or not, but the work that you're doing is going to impact a lot of people, most of whom you will never meet, people who will never know your name, but their lives will forever be improved because of the work you are doing. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. Now it's on. Thank you so much, the Attorney General, for being here, for being so gracious about the time that you spent with us. We have 10 minutes for Q&A, and if you were here the last panel, you know I'm a stickler for time, so it'll be 10 minutes for Q&A. And because it's such limited time, we would like to take questions from participants of the symposium, those of you who pre-registered and have been participating in the last day and will continue to stay with us. I'd like to take questions from you, if possible. Sarah, is that a question?
Yes. Go here?
No, here.
Okay. 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 Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Sarah Deere, and I spoke at the panel yesterday on Indigenous issues.
Oh, yes, I heard about that,
Yeah.
which is great.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your position on tribal governments and their role in intersecting human trafficking, and also to restore jurisdiction to tribal governments to be able to take action in cases where their own women and children are being violated.
Right. So I have, I've done some work with the tribes on this issue and similar issues, in particular mostly on domestic violence. And I'm sure that what came out of your panel was part of the challenge that we have and the work we need to do is to be very clear, all of us, in terms of who has jurisdiction on the case, right? Is it tribal law? Is it going to be federal law? Is it going to be the local prosecutors and police? And so that's part of what I see as a challenge, which is about basically cross-jurisdictional training and collaboration and task forces, because as we know, and for those of you I'm sure who were there or not there, you know they're sovereign nations, the tribes. And so we have to respect their rules and their laws and do what we can to collaborate and also create access to, for example, the facilities that are available in terms of the treatment programs and counseling that is available that aren't often naturally on the reservation. So, but one of the biggest issues I see is the issue of collaboration and cross-training. We've been doing that with some of the tribes as it relates to just their desire and work to be more robust with their law enforcement efforts across the board, whether it's drugs or domestic violence or homicides. But I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration and cross-training. Thanks.
Is it on? Hi. I'm Dr. Susie Baldwin with the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health.
Right.
I want to thank you for your leadership in general and for your leadership on human trafficking in particular. We're
Thank
very
you.
happy to have you in office.
Thank you.
I do want to question or comment on the statistics you've provided about human trafficking in California. A lot of the focus on human trafficking in this county, in the state, and in the nation has recently trended towards commercial sexual exploitation of children,
Yeah.
which is there's a tremendous need for us to focus on that. But as you know, there are other forms of trafficking.
Absolutely.
Trafficking of adults, trafficking
Yep.
for labor. And the statistics that you cite seem to reflect child sex trafficking in terms of nearly 3/4 being U.S. born in California, average age of 12 to 14.
14.
My question is about these statistics, and how do you count for the labor trafficking victims that we're not really looking for, so
Right.
we're not able to count them? Thank you.
Thank you and that's a very important point. And so I kept my comments to the sex trafficking, but you are absolutely right, and that's actually in our report. In terms of labor trafficking, it is equally significant. It tends to, in terms of the victims, skew more toward male victims than female. And we find that there is even less reporting there than there is in the trafficking that involves sex and labor, sex trafficking. I think that part of what, again, is going to be necessary in terms of the overall outreach is that we are more effective with young men and outreach to them, and in particular around the labor trafficking. But the information that we got was compiled from a number of sources that had to do with the counties, had to do with police departments, NGOs, community-based organizations. So.
Hello, my name is Charity Chandler, and I'm here with the Public Health Foundation. I also actually was in the foster care system and juvenile justice system, and I experienced girls being criminalized and punished for their acts.
Yeah.
And what's further important is that when they turn 18, they're no longer considered
Right.
minors under the law, and there's further implications with their continuing prostitution and now having it on their record. So what, if anything, is being done to help this population when they decide to redeem themselves and run away from their oppressors and want to be want to do something with their lives and they can't because of this criminal record? What is being done to help that?
That's great, and thank you for your leadership. Thank you. So one of the things that's being done is that there's some legislation in Sacramento that will allow the victim of human trafficking to expunge her record. And I think that's critical and very important. You know, way back when, it's almost 10 years now, AB 22, I was a part of that with Sally Lieber, who was then in the Assembly. And it's now California law. That bill created California law against human trafficking because we had federal statutes and we needed to have state laws also. And part of the beauty of that legislation was that not only would we create protections for the victim, but after there had been a prosecution of the case, this was just beautiful, but that the victim could sue the defendant in civil court to get back the money he made off of her, which was just beautiful, right? Because again, follow the money, go after the money. You know, that's why they're motivated, take it. And so there is, but we're There's slow but good progress, and the most recent is around allowing a victim to expunge her record, which is very important, critical. And the other point you made is absolutely right. I think we're doing better work on realizing that when a child turns 18, they are still a child. You know, the way I think about that is that it's just all a matter of the circumstances. It has nothing, we don't recognize that age is more than a chronological fact, right, in terms of the stages of life. So, you know, when I was at Howard University, we were 18 through 24, as are the undergrads at UCLA or anywhere else, and we were called college kids. But when you're in the system and you turn 18, you're considered an adult, period, without regard to the fact that that is the very phase of life in which we have invested billions of dollars in this world in places called colleges and universities, knowing that's the prime phase of life during which you mold and shape and direct a human being to become a productive adult. And what else do we know about that phase of life? They're stupid. That's why we put them in dormitories. And they have a resident assistant because they don't always exercise good judgment. But they're brilliant, and they're going to become great leaders, and they are great leaders. I don't mean to diminish the that phase of life, but only my point only is meant to make this point, which is that it's a travesty that depending on where that 18 through 24-year-old is, they're either acknowledged for being incredibly bright and capable of so much but need a lot of support, or they're treated as an adult who can take on all of the responsibilities for themselves and be self-sufficient and accountable for everything. We've still got a lot of work to do there. Thank you.
Hi, Kamala. Thank you so much for being here today. My question is, as a social change advocate, I'm kind of grappling. Can you speak to the realities of both of these situations and potential solutions?
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for your work. Well, one bright spot, I think, for California is AB 109, the passage of AB 109, which is the Realignment Act of California. You all know the background on it. It was born out of crisis because of the overcrowding system in our state prison system, because we had a revolving door, because we were totally in a reactive mode instead of preventive. But now we are in a new phase in terms of criminal justice policy in California, and we have mandated that the 58 counties take on the responsibility for low-level offenders and focus on doing what they should and can do to re-enter former offenders in a way that we reduce the likelihood that they'll re-offend. To that end, last 2 years now, I created the Division of Recidivism Reduction and Reentry in my office, focused on this exact point. And it has 3 subdivisions. One is focused on highlighting best practices that exist in the state and around the country to reduce recidivism. So reentry programs is what they're called. Another part of this division is focused on what we can do to bring resources to the counties, so grant funding and things like that. And then the third is focused on what we've got to do in measuring the effectiveness of our criminal justice system, which is infuse metrics into our analysis. We have for so long gauged the effectiveness of our criminal justice system based on some blind adherence to tradition, which tells us we're effective if we have high conviction rates. Well, at the point that you're talking about conviction, you're talking about reacting after the crime has occurred. And I agree, conviction rates are important to know and measure, but not alone. And part of what we need to do is also measure recidivism rates. Known offenders who are reoffending, because most of the time it's predictable. To that end, the third division of our Division on Recidivism Reduction and Reentry is focused on bringing metrics into our state's analysis of effectiveness, and in particular, by measuring recidivism in the 58 counties. And so we recently offered the counties a definition of recidivism that would be a universal definition of recidivism, because again, on the detail, part of the problem has been that we've had at least 58 different definitions of recidivism in the state. So how can you measure it if everyone is measuring something different? So that's some of the work we're doing.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the Attorney General for her dedication to this issue. She's been focused on it for many years and hopefully for more years to come.
Oh.
Thanks, Emily, for presenting the flowers. Please join me in a round of applause for the Attorney General.
Thank you. Thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before you leave, I have a few announcements about the rest of the day. Oh, that's good. Usually people get up and start walking away, and then you're that guy that doesn't know what's going on. Okay, so 4 announcements. First, we're going to head back over to the law school for the rest of the symposium. For folks that can walk, I'll be leading the way with a megaphone. For folks that don't feel like walking or can't walk, whatever it may be, look towards the back. Dr. Beth Rabe will be leading the way. And if you are parked close by in the parking lot 4 and you'd like to be near the law school at the end of the day, you should get back into your car and park in parking lot 3. Otherwise, it's a 10-minute walk from here to the law school, so not too big of a deal. If you have a disability placard or want access to a disability spot, also ask Dr. Beth Rabe about that. We have lunches available for everybody who pre-registered for the symposium. And for those who did not pre-register, we're going to do our best to accommodate you because we like to feed people. So limited to space, we may be able to feed everybody. But for everybody who pre-registered, you have a little ticket, a little red ticket, I think it is, that came with your materials. You'll be using that for lunch. And the last announcement is it parking? That's it. All right, so see everybody at the law school. We have a lunch from 12:30 to 1:30, something like that.